Hey everyone, it is Haley here, also known as Gabrielle for the Facebook folks, and today we will be doing a spotlight on God's general named Charles Parham. So a lot of what I'm going to be reading is taken from the Healing and Revival website, so we will just jump right in. So we'll start, and it says, Charles Fox Parham was born in Muscatine, Iowa on June 4th, 1873. His mother was a devout Christian. Awesome. Good. Like many of his contemporaries, he had severe health struggles. He was born with a club foot. While a baby, he contracted a viral infection that left him physically weakened. His family moved to Kansas in 1878, where at the age of 9, he got rheumatic fever. This left him in even worse physical condition. It was during this period that he first felt a call to ministry. Wow, so that's young. He felt a call to ministry young. That's great. And it says Parham's mother died in 1885, so he was about 12, which was a devastating blow to him. It would be, yeah. He committed that he would see her in heaven and chose to be converted shortly after her death and became saved in a congregational church evangelistic meeting. He joined a local Methodist church and began to teach Sunday school. In 1888, at the age of 15, he began holding evangelistic services. I love that. 15 years old and holding evangelistic meetings. That's great. In 1890, Parham went to Southwest Kansas College. He was still struggling with severe bouts of rheumatic fever. Although his initial plan was to study theology, he switched to medicine. In 1891, he was debilitated by a very severe attack of rheumatic fever. He thought he might die. He felt that God asked him if he was willing to go and preach. He repented for not following God and was healed. Wow. God also healed him of his club foot. Parham became on fire for the truth of divine healing. Okay, so we see that he had all these struggles and then was on the brink of death. We'll see this is a pattern in some of the God's generals. So then he repented and then went and followed the Lord's call to preach, and then he was healed. So that's really great. And it says, he began to study healing and Wesleyan holiness teaching. In 1893, he left school and became an interim pastor of a Methodist church near Lawrence, Kansas. He left that church in 1895 and became an independent minister, primarily teaching on healing and praying for the sick. Great. He got married in 1896 to his wife, Sarah Ella. In 1898, Parham visited John Alexander Dowie's healing homes in Chicago. He was so impressed that he returned and founded a healing faith home called Bethel in Topeka, Kansas. The couple also began to publish a holiness journal called Apostolic Faith. You guys maybe have heard of that. In 1900, Parham visited several holiness religious centers. He spent 6 weeks at Frank W. Sanford's holiness community at Shiloh, Maine, so in the state of Maine. He also visited D.L. Moody in Chicago, A.J. Gordon's church in Boston, Massachusetts, and A.B. Simpson in Nyack, New York. Much of the holiness movement was focused on a great end-time outpouring of the Holy Spirit. He heard stories of small outbreaks of tongues among students at Sanford's community in July of 1900. He believed that the gift of tongues would empower missionaries for the great end-times harvest. Parham returned to Topeka and committed to open a Bible school where students could be taught to seek the presence of the Holy Spirit in a greater way to fulfill a missionary call. That's awesome. By September 1900, Parham had found Stone's Folly. It was a castle with 2 towers that had been built and then abandoned. It had been sitting vacant for about 10 years. Parham and a group of about 40 students, their spouses and children, lived and worked in the school. They set up one of the 2 towers as their prayer tower and prayed 24 hours a day. That's great. The building was leaky and drafty, and living conditions were difficult. In 1901, Parham went on a trip and encouraged his students to search the scriptures for evidence of the Holy Spirit. When he returned, they had decided that speaking in tongues was that evidence. The Parhams were forced to leave Stone's Folly when someone else took over the building. The group moved to Kansas City, but their message did not catch on. Parham held a revival meeting in El Dorado Springs, Missouri, a local hot spring center where people came to take the water cure. You guys may have heard of that too. Mrs. Mary A. Arthur, who was visiting the springs with several illnesses, came to Parham's meetings and asked him to pray for her. She was dramatically healed of her problems, including blindness in one eye. Okay, blindness healed. That's great. Mrs. Arthur invited Parham to preach in her home in Galena, Kansas in the fall of 1903. Services went on for months, and thousands of people attended the meetings. All right. 1,000 people claimed healings, and 800 were converted. Okay. And thousands accepted the Pentecostal teaching, and new churches began to be established. Several churches were opened in and around Houston, Texas. In 1905, Parham opened the Houston Bible School. Although it was segregated, it was attended by William Seymour, a black holiness evangelist. We will do a video on him as well. Years of Parham's life were lived in Baxter Springs, Kansas. He moved there in 1909. In 1910, Parham wrote A Voice of One Crying in the Wilderness and The Everlasting Gospel in 1911. He was a man willing to step out in faith where few others had gone before. In doing so, he helped to change the world. Yeah, very cool. So yeah, there were some different things that went on in his life that were kind of controversial that I just kind of didn't even bother to read. But this is just an encouragement to see that, you know, we can go back and see that in his younger years, like even when he was 9 years old, he saw the call of the Lord on his life. And finally, he did submit to that calling. And we see, you know, in the one meeting in that, you know, the woman's house, we see that like 800 people were saved, 1,000 said that they were healed, and the Lord was really touched and worked through Charles Parham very strongly, which is just fantastic. And I know that some people do have, you know, some shortcomings, and there were in Charles Parham's life, but we just want to take the good things that the people do and be encouraged by those things. So he was definitely one that was bold for the Lord, was not afraid to step out. He knew that faith was a muscle, as we know, and so he used it. So this is my encouragement for you all to use your faith muscles this week and just be encouraged that the Lord uses anyone and everyone who is willing to submit to him. Blessings on you all, and thank you so much. Have a great week.